Welcome, everyone, to the Girlfriend Book Club's monthly discussion. I'm Shelley Emling, the editor of the Girlfriend newsletter. I'm also the moderator of the Girlfriend Book Club. And this month, the nearly 90,000 members of the Girlfriend Book Club chose, as our August pick, the Paris novel. And I'm so glad that you did, because once again, you chose a real page turner, and I loved it. And I'm so excited that tonight for our monthly discussion, we're joined by the author, Ruth Reichl, who is a renowned chef, a food critic, the former editor-in-chief of Gourmet. She has quite the resume. So welcome, Ruth. We're so glad to have you here.
It is a complete pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's such a delight. I have to say, I really did. I read this in a weekend. I love this book so much. Well done.
The response to it has been pure pleasure. I mean, I haven't ever gotten a response quite like this to anything I've done.
It's amazing. So first, I just had to ask you, and I know you've been asked this a million times. I watched some other interviews with you today, but the book is dedicated to your longtime editor, Susan Campbell. And I just wondered if you could tell everybody in the book club how that started. Why did she want you to write this book?
So my last book, which Susan edited, was about my time at Gourmet, Save Me the Plums. And as we were working on it, Susan said there's a chapter in it about when we were working on the first Gourmet Paris issue. I went into what's probably the greatest vintage clothing store in the world in Paris, a place I've been going since I was a kid, but I had never dared to try anything on. But
now I'm still there. Is it still there?
Yeah, it's still there. Yes. And I try on this dress that absolutely transforms me. It is, I look in the mirror and I don't believe what I'm seeing. I mean, I'm like the creature I've always wanted to be. I'm stunned. And the sales lady says, "This is your dress." And I say, "How much is it?" And she says, $6,000. And I say, "No, this is not my dress." And I leave it. And Susan said, "I wanted so much for you to buy that dress." And she said, "And I wish you would write a novel about a character who buys the dress and what happens to her when she buys the dress." And so I did. And sadly, I had just started writing the book when Susan very unexpectedly and tragically died. And so I'm writing this book for someone who is no longer with us, but I felt that she was sitting on my shoulder as I wrote this book, because writing it was such a different experience than anything I've ever had with writing. I mean, I felt like every day when I sat down at my computer, I was going to Paris.
Wow. Did you think that was a little bit of an odd idea when she first mentioned it to you about a dress kind of transforming you, or did
Not
you?
At all, because I had the experience. I mean, I had this dress turn me into the most glamorous creature. And I have had some experience of transformation with costuming. One of my earlier books, Garlic and Sapphires, is about the disguises I wore when I was a restaurant critic of the New York Times.
Right.
And I mean, I know that what you wear can very much change you. And I've spent a lot of time in Paris. I'm very comfortable there. I love the city. And I suddenly thought, I can put everything I really love into this book. I can put art and literature and fashion and food. It can all be there. And it was like this great gift that she gave me.
So she knew you were working on it, though, at least, right?
She knew that she knew that I'd started it, but she never read one word.
Oh, that's a shame. A lot of people in the book club wondered why you said it in 1983, I think.
1983. For a few reasons. And one was I wanted access to the entire century. I wanted access to the Paris of Hemingway and, Gertrude Stein.
Right.
And I have this old man who sort of becomes her mentor.
Right.
And so he knew everyone. He knew Picasso, and it gave me access to all of that. But there was another reason, which was I went to the LA Times in 1984. Until I went to the LA Times, I was a freelance writer with no money at all. So the Paris that I know, even though I was a restaurant critic and writing about the best restaurants in America, I had never been to a 3-star restaurant in France. And in 1984, I go to the LA Times and I say to my new boss, and it's the first real job I've ever had. I've always been freelance. And I say to my new boss, what's my expense account? At the time, the LA Times was known as the Velvet Coffin because it was such a cushy place to work. And this man turned to me and said, we'll let you know when you go over it.
Wow.
And they never did. And so the first thing I thought was, I'm going to Paris. I'm going to go eat. I mean, I should have eaten in all these restaurants. If I'm going to be a big deal restaurant critic, I need to know this food. And they never said, no, don't go spend thousands of dollars in restaurants. Oh, so I had the notes from all those meals. So there was that. There was also the fact that 1983 was a very good time. And I mean, the franc was weak. The dollar was strong. It was a good time to be an American in Paris. But even more than that, traveling before iPhones was such a different experience.
Yeah.
I mean, in those days, when you went abroad, you went away.
Yeah.
You were disconnected from your real life. You were in a foreign place. And I wanted Stella to have that experience of being really in a place that was utterly new, where she had to live in a world that was completely unfamiliar.
So is Stella based on you, and was it hard to say goodbye to Stella when you finished the book?
Stella is not based on me. I mean, I am not a timid person who, I mean, I have been indulging in the things that I care about all of my life. I mean, I have always been a very happy eater, which Stella certainly wasn't. Right. And I wanted to imagine someone who had never experienced pleasure. I mean, I wanted to write about the transformative power of pleasure. And was it hard to let Stella go? It was hard to let them all go. I mean, I loved all these characters so much. I mean, Jules, I mean, what a wonderful person he is. And George Whitman, who I sadly never met, but certainly read about, this wonderful eccentric character. And Django. I mean, I love them all.
Well, I always ask authors, I mean, you say you love them all, but was there a particular character or a scene or a chapter that was more challenging to write about than the others?
Well, writing that first scene, that scene that everybody is so surprised about the sexual abuse, was difficult. Celia was a difficult character for me to wrap my arms around, because I very much wanted, for as Stella becomes transformed, I think an important part of it was for her to come to understand her mother in some way and to be able to forgive her, which I think is a big part of like what growing up is. But then also, some of like Richard Olney, who I knew a little bit, was so wonderful. I mean, I love the Olney chapter. I mean, I never went to his house, but I admire him so much, and it felt really good to feel as if I was introducing him to. He's not well enough known in the United States, and it was great to, bring him into the world in some way. And also, John Ashbery, who lived very near me. He lived in Hudson, New York, and at one point called me up and said that he would like me to come visit his kitchen and write about it. And while I was there, he gave me, when he lived in Paris in the 50s, he had kept a notebook. It was this huge sort of scrapbook where he had cut recipes out of newspapers and magazines in Paris. And he said, if you're going to write about my kitchen, you need to read this. Wow. And I took it home and felt like I got to know him in another way other than his poetry through reading this scrapbook. And then I knew him. I mean, he was in his 90s when I met him. And to go back and look at archival material about him to see he was gorgeous. I mean, it was really shocking. I had no idea. I mean, he was stunningly beautiful as a younger man.
What about the tumbleweeds? How did you come up with that?
Well, that's real.
That is real. Okay.
That is real. I mean, that's one of the things that's so extraordinary. I mean, Shakespeare and Company is one of the great bookstores in the world. And part of it is the generosity of George Whitman, who actually lived to be a very old man. I mean, went to Paris in the 50s, he went in the 40s. He went to liberate the city as a GI, fell in love with the city, stayed. And, what I say in the story is true, that for some reason, the American Army decided that they should give books to GIs. So they gave out vouchers. And of course, the GIs, most of them, the last thing they wanted after waiting ashore on D-Day was to start buying books, even for free. And so he scooped these all up. And before he was done, he had so many books in his hotel room, there was no room for him to sleep. So he rented this little storefront. But he genuinely believed that literature was necessary to people. And the motto in his store was, take what you need, pay what you can.
Yeah.
I mean, and the things that I say about him, about his burning his hair to cut it with matches, it's true. You can go online and pick videos of him doing it. And he decided that, if people needed a place to stay, they could stay in the shop. And over the years, 30,000 people have slept in that shop.
Wow.
And you can still do it.
That's amazing. Yeah, I did not know that was actually real. So
no, it's totally real. And I know many people, I never did it myself, which I regret, but I knew many people who did and heard the stories. And when you walk through the shop, you see little signs everywhere. I mean, what I say in the book, little signs saying, I met my husband when we were both tumbleweeds in the store, and now our kids are, being tumbleweeds. Those are all things I took right off the wall and wrote down.
So I looked up some of your interviews about this book today, and I saw that you said that this was, I think you had the most fun writing this book of all your books.
Of all my books.
This was the most fun. Is that true? If that's true.
Absolutely. And the response to it has been the most fun. I mean, when I started writing this, I did not know that, one, the Olympics was going to be in Paris and it was going to come out right then. And I also didn't know that we would be in such a fraught, difficult time that everybody in America, I think, would want a moment of getting away.
Yeah.
And I wrote this book that takes you away, because I love those kind of books. I mean, I love to vanish into a book for a while.
So I also heard you say today in an interview that you are a writer who doesn't actually like writing that much. So I'm curious about what your writing process is like when you're doing a book like this.
I am not alone in this. So many writers loathe writing. I mean, I will do anything. I will go clean the bathrooms 3 times before I'll sit down and sit at my computer. But I love having written. There's no better feeling than when you've had a good day in the studio and you just come out. It's like a drug. It's wonderful. So my process is, I have a little writing cabin that's just a few feet from the house, but it's very separate. And I don't have internet out there. And in the winter, I have to light a fire because it's, it's primitive.
Right.
But I try and go out early. I mean, when my mind is still uncluttered with the day's whatever is going on. I mean,
Like at
once
5 a.m. or what?
well, when I had a job, I got up at 4 a.m. to write.
Right.
And in some ways it was easier. I would write for 3 hours and then get my guys up and make them breakfast and, get us all out the door. But not having a day job, I usually make breakfast for my husband and then go out and go to work. But it's important to get it done early.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. I'm like you. I'm a morning person. So I asked the Girlfriend Book Club members if they had any questions for you. And of course I got a gazillion. And they were saying, uh, was your writing process for fiction for this different than writing for a memoir?
Very different. And in many ways, more fun. Because when you're writing a memoir, or when I'm writing a memoir, I pretty much know where I'm going. I know the shape of the story. I'm going from point A to point B, and I will have these various elements in this. For fiction, I have no idea what's going to happen. So every day is an adventure. And it's like, oh, what are my characters going to do today? What are they going to say? I mean, um, and the other thing that makes fiction for me much easier, I can't offend anyone.
Right.
I mean, the thing about writing memoir or journalism is nobody ever likes what you write about them. No matter how laudatory it is, people don't like it. So, and I don't like offending people. So the whole process of writing memoir is, oh my God, when so-and-so reads this portrait of themselves, are they going to be furious at me?
So somebody else wanted to know how many of the food experiences in the book did you have yourself?
Every single one.
Really?
Every single one. I mean, part of why I chose that time period was because I was in France in the 83, 84, 85, and every one of them. I mean, I did in fact eat in the kitchen with Jean Trois Gros. I have had that experience at L'Ami Louis. I did go to Marc Mayneau and go for lunch and stay through dinner.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And I have been going to Robert et Louise since the 60s. I never go to Paris without going there. So they're all meals I had notes from.
So how much time have you spent in Paris, and would you ever consider living there part of the year or anything like that?
I have spent a lot of time in Paris. I went to French boarding school for high school. And then to sort of keep my French up, I worked at a French camp when I was in college. So, and as a food person, you go to Paris a lot. So I've probably been to Paris 50 times.
Wow. Okay.
I would not want to live in Paris because I had this very odd experience, which was when I was in boarding school, I would go to visit my friends at their homes. And the day I turned 18, when I said, oh, I'm coming to France, they would say, we'll get you a hotel room. And I think it is very, very difficult to live a truly French life as an American.
Right.
It's not a great place to be an expat unless you're married to a French person.
So somebody else asked, I mean, how did this all start? Your kind of passion for food and writing about food. I mean, was your mother or grandmother great cooks and passed it down to you? How did that all start?
It's the exact opposite. The first chapter of my first book, Tender at the Bone, it's called The Queen of Mold. And it's about my mother and it's about the party she threw for my brother's wedding engagement where she put 26 people in the hospital with food poisoning. My mother was a truly terrifying cook. I mean, she did not believe in the concept of rot. The earliest memory I have is my mother going through the refrigerator and scraping the blue stuff off the top and said, "Little mold never hurt anyone." So the cover of that book is me at 7 cooking. And if you look at my face, you know this is not a party trick.
Right.
I mean, I pushed my mother away from the stove as quickly as I could. And, the odd thing about being a child cook is no matter what you cook, everybody tells you how great it is and what a great cook you are. And so you get this positive reinforcement and you become a great cook. But I have always cooked. I believe that cooking is what we as human beings do naturally.
Right.
We cook, animals don't.
So somebody else asked in the book club that they love all your books. They wanted me to say that this was their favorite of all your books. But after a lifetime of living, cooking, writing, reviewing, editing, what has been your most defining experience what's the most important experience of your life, the defining moment of your career, maybe?
I would say being the editor of Gourmet. It was amazing to be given this Bible, and at a moment when Americans were coming to food, and to feel like we could really lead that conversation. It was also my first real experience as a manager. I had 60 people who worked for me.
Oh, wow. That's a lot. Yeah.
It's very rewarding to help people find out what they're good at. And I loved putting out that. I loved going to work every day. I loved putting out that magazine. I'm really proud of what we did. I loved the fact that Condé Nast is a very hierarchical institution, but they let me run it the way I wanted. We were kind of like the hippie. We did everything together. I mean, everybody had a voice at Gourmet, and it was the best 10 years. It was fantastic.
So somebody else asked,
my son, which was the other great.
Yeah, don't leave that out.
Leave that out.
Somebody else asked, what's your favorite meal? I don't know if they mean what's the favorite meal that you can cook or that you've had. Is there a favorite dish that you just love?
I just made it because it's what I'm going to have for dinner tonight. In tomato season, I love spaghetti with fresh tomato sauce. A little bit of just tomatoes left very alone, a little bit of butter, Parmesan cheese, perfect.
So what are you working on next? What's up next?
I have 2 things. I'm writing a sequel to this book because
that's fantastic. I didn't know that. I didn't see that anywhere today when I was doing research.
I hated giving them up, and I really want to know what happens to them.
Yeah.
So I'm working on a sequel, and I wrote a cookbook. My first book is a very hard to find book since it was published in 1972, and it's very much a document of its time. It's called and I really want to do an annotated version of that, which will be kind of a history of American food in the last 50 years. So 2 projects. And I did a movie during COVID, which is being released in October. So I'm going to be doing it. It's about our broken food system. It's called Food and Country.
Really? And it's coming out in October?
It's coming out in October. It's a documentary. It's going to be, released in art houses, and then it will be available streaming.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. I did not know that. So I just have like 4 more questions because we're almost out of time. So somebody just wanted to know a little bit about where you grew up, your background a little bit.
Okay.
I mean, how did you start writing, that sort of thing?
I grew up in Greenwich Village, New York City. My father was a book designer,
Hmm.
and so, among other things, he designed Ulysses. But I grew up in publishing. All my parents' friends were in publishing in one way or another. And so books were a very big part of my life growing up. And um, I always kind of wanted to be a writer and always knew that I could write. I mean, it was, the thing that I was good at. And I was really passionate about food
Hmm.
from a very young age, but it never occurred to me that I could
Combine those two.
combine those two things. And so I got a master's in history of art, thinking I was going to teach history of art. So, which is where that comes into this book as
Yeah.
well. Um, and then I couldn't get any after graduate school. My husband and I moved to New York, and I couldn't get a job I liked anywhere. I mean, and I was making these huge meals for friends, and then we were living in a loft on the Lower East Side. And one day, one of my friends said, "You're such a good cook. You ought to write a cookbook." And because I knew people in publishing, I went to an editor and said, "I have this idea of writing a cookbook." And she said, "Well, write a sample chapter and show it to me." And she said, "We'll publish it." And then, I mean, it couldn't happen today. I mean, this is very, this is when nobody cared about food. So it was the idea. They were very taken with the idea of a young person, a 22-year-old, writing a cookbook. Maybe it would sell. And then people thought I was a food writer, and I just fell into every job I had.
That's incredible. So three more things. I just wondered, is there an author you admire or a book you've read recently that you could recommend to the group that you just love?
Yes, I just finished a book called Sandwich by
Yeah,
Catherine Newman.
that's our book club pick for next month, believe it or not.
Really? Oh, I
Yeah,
love
the
this.
author is joining us on the third Tuesday of the month in September.
Oh, oh, well, she's amazing. I absolutely love that book. The other book I've read recently that I loved, and maybe you've done a book club on this too, is How Do You Say Babylon
No, we
by
haven't done that
Sophia
one.
Sinclair, which I just, I read it about 6 months ago, but it really stays with me. She's a poet, and she grew up in a reggae family, and it covers everything:
Wow.
poverty, race, gender, beauty. I highly recommend it.
Good, thank you. And I just have to ask, I always ask everybody this. I mean, The Girlfriend is all about female friendship and the power of female friendship. So when you're not writing or cooking, I mean, what do you like to do for fun with your friends?
Well, I like to walk, and I have a group of women that I walk with, and both here and when I'm in LA, different groups. But and then my friend, two of my closest LA friends, and I travel a lot together. I mean, there's nothing like girlfriend traveling. I mean, traveling with your friends,
Yeah.
in my opinion, is so much more fun than traveling with your family.
Where do you like to go? What's been your best trip?
Our best trip was probably Japan,
Oh, wow.
but
I'd love to go.
um, um, but we've had great trips to Italy, to France, to Spain, to Northern California. Just a road trip one that a group of us did was great. It's mostly, when you travel with your family, there's always tensions.
Yeah.
Travel with your friends, everything's
It's
easy.
fun. Right. Well, thank you so much, Ruth, for being with us. I so appreciate it. I think everybody's read it already, but the Paris novel, tell your friends, everybody buy it. It's great, a great read. And I just have to remind everybody that Sandwich is our book club pick for September. Our book club,
Love it, love it, love it.
I know, I'm just starting it. And our book club pick for October is The Briar Club by Kate Quinn. So that should be interesting too. I heard that's really good. And just stay on the page because I'm going to be posting some conversation starters so that you guys can talk about what you loved about the Paris novel. Again, thank you so much for joining us, Ruth. I so appreciate it.
This
It's an
was so
honor
much
to
fun.
meet you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Good night, everybody. Thanks so much for joining.